Hey, good morning. I hope you're doing well. Glad you came to church today. Glad you came here. All that to say, after you hear what we're going to talk about, you may not be as glad that you actually came to church today. On Friday, the Supreme Court drops this ruling down on our country and that legalized same-sex marriages. And my phone started going crazy. I mean, like the Facebook and the messages and the emails and all that kind of stuff. It's like, what are you gonna? I thought I was preaching about tithing or something. I didn't know exactly what had happened, but so then we started finding out what was happening. And what I have learned since that happened is all of the experts on this are actually on social media. So if you'll just look on Facebook, all of the experts are there. That's where all the truth is, and people know what we're supposed to do. But if you notice, the effect of the ruling has actually been quite polarizing, not only in our culture, but also within church walls, even within this church's walls. There are many who celebrate the decision, and there are just as many who are kind of saddened and even fearful by the decision. And I think it's safe to say that emotions are rather raw on this topic for a good many people. And because we all have people we love deeply that are dealing with this emotion. Some of us, the people we love in this community, in this church, are struggling deeply with this particular issue. I do think it would be irresponsible for me as a pastor to kind of not even address it and to kind of pretend like it didn't happen. And so at the risk of offending everybody, I'm going to do my best to sort of tell you some things that I think you may want to know. Now listen, before you send an email or before you go and state something real personal on Facebook for me, here's what I want you to know. Like many of you, I have family members that are dealing with this issue too. And so I don't take it lightly. This is a very, very difficult issue. And so we have to be cautious in how we interact and how we relate to each other over this particular issue. And yet the same thing needs to say, I'm not trying to convince you away from what you believe today. I'm not trying to do that because I'm not an expert in any of this. And we have this variety of opinions about the issue within the body, but I do think it's important for you to know where this church stands or where the Wesleyan church stands. And even after you hear what I'm saying, all of us you're welcome in the body. Let's be here. But you need to understand, if your membership's here, whatever, how this particular church stands. And so having set that stage, and now everybody's scared because you don't know what I'm going to say, and it's going to be fine, because a little later we're going to bring snakes out, and you can handle them to see whether or not you have faith. Where does our church stand? Well, here's the Wesleyan Church has long held and continues to believe that marriage is an institution created by God and must be between one man and one woman. And that's kind of what the church has stood for. And as I go through this, there's going to be times when you're going to want to kind of react in some way. And you may want to applaud. Don't do that. I'm wishful thinking. But anyway, you may want to applaud. But you also may want to get up and leave. I'm saying don't do that, because it may be offensive to the person you're sitting beside. And our goal is not to offend here. And so the Wesleyan Church believes this, and the position has actually been verified. In 2004, the Wesleyan Church has this general conference. Every church has its governing bodies. Well, International General Conference, they took a ballot vote and unanimously approved this definition of marriage between a man and a woman. In fact, the Wesleyan Church put a statement out, and all of this is in the church app. If you got Droid or Apple, Alive Wesleyan, there's a church app. It's free. All of the notes from here and all the notes from the message are on that app, as well as the links. I put some links in the app for you to follow if you want to follow up on some of the discussion. But from a statement put out by the Wesleyan Church, the church must be keenly aware of the cultural context for ministry and be willing to change, adapt, and stay relevant in matters of non-essentials. However, it must never sacrifice or compromise clear biblical truth. And the church will always be a prophetic, countercultural voice offering Jesus Christ and his way of life and hope in exchange for the ways of the world. So that's kind of how the church stands. So now the next question I would have is, well, does our faith now need to change because of the most recent ruling? And I just want to remind you just today, this isn't the first time believers have lived under the authority of a government that sort of ruled in an incongruous way with biblical truth. This isn't the first time that happened. In fact, the same Supreme Court in 1857 legalized slavery. And so those of us that are kind of chicken littling this thing, maybe it's not the best reaction. Early Christians often found themselves placed under rulers who not only didn't tolerate them, but they hunted them out. They didn't support a Christian way of life. Now, it's foreign in the United States, because look at what you're sitting on right now. It's nice and cushy. I'm talking about the chair, not anything else down there. But as you look at the chair, it's this nice padded place you're sitting, and the air-conditioned room, and it's beautiful. You had a nice place to park. We're not used to this kind of thing, but the fact is, our roots are very much this kind of thing. Let's not forget the cornerstone of our faith is Jesus Christ. He was tried, convicted, and put to death by two separate forms of government. Your faith doesn't have to change for this day, guys. It was actually made for this day. And so as you react to this, we don't need to be afraid of what might come. Don't be fearful. Okay? We're victorious. Just know what you believe and build your house on truth. We don't have to be afraid. We're called to be faithful, not to have our way in any sort of government. We are called to be faithful people. And so we need to stand firm. Now you're saying, Tom, your head's in the sand. No, it's not. I'm well aware of what it could mean for our culture, what it could mean for me personally, what it could mean for our church. I understand that. But we're to stand firm in what we believe and then trust deeply in who we believe. I figure God's not rattled. So I'm not going to be. Last thing is this. So now what are we supposed to do? Pick it. I know I got something. I just thought of something smart to say on Facebook. I'm going to say that right now. You know, all that. It's evil. That's a sign of evil all around the world, by the way. I think it's a unique time for Christian people to shine. Hear me on this, and this is where I'm going to take us for the rest of the morning. For some reason, of all generations, God has selected this generation right here, this part of his bride, for this issue. And as an evangelical Christians, our message is simple and our message is unique. Are you ready? We don't agree. We don't agree. We see practicing homosexuals as sinful, and yet we are crazy nuts in love with sinful people. That's the unique voice of the Christian. That's why what you need to say, that's why we need to handle this in that kind of way. There's an article posted on a website called Desiring God. It's all in the app if you want to follow. And then that website, he says this, or on that site, you are wrong, and you're loved. As Tim Keller so well puts it, we're far worse than we ever imagined and far more loved than we could ever dream. That's our message in the debate. We have this incomparable opportunity to let the gospel shine, to reach out in grace. You're wrong, but man, do I love you. I love you. And we get to say this. And you say, Tom, how could we possibly say this? I'll tell you why. Because it's your story too. We get acting all church-like and smelling church-like in this place. And we forget that a long time ago, some of us not too long ago, a guy or girl like me stood in front of a group like this and said, you know what, Tom? You're wrong. But I so love you. And that resulted in a heart change in me, and it did for a lot of people in this room, where someone said, you know, I'm not going to compromise. I'm not going to water this down. You're still wrong. But I love you. And that love won me. And that's the essence of the gospel. As Christians, we're against any sin that keeps people from God. Homosexuality is getting a lot of the press today, but homosexuality is not the issue. The issue is sin. That's drunkenness, gluttony, thievery. Aren't you glad those aren't in the press? That's what we're against, is sin. And that's what we should make our voice so unique when we speak into this debate. I'm not against a particular brand of sinner. I'm against sin. Warren Wiersbe summed it up this way, pastor, author. He said, truth without love is brutality, and love without truth is hypocrisy. And so for the past few weeks, because of God's providential plan, we've been studying the greatest sermon that's ever been delivered, specifically the part at the end of that sermon. So Jesus delivers the Sermon on the Mount, and then he says, how are we going to end this teaching? And he ends it by telling this story about two guys building a house. One guy builds his house on solid rock. So Jesus says this, everybody who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. So the wise man builds his house on a rock, on a solid foundation, and then this great storm comes. Wind and rain and all this happens, and the house stands because it's on a foundation of rock. But then there's this other dude who builds a house. And he chooses to build his house on sand. And Jesus has a word to say about him too. Everybody who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who builds a house on sand. The foundation's not secure, as is obvious by this great hand illustration. Only you people get this, not everybody else, just you people. It's shifting, and the storm comes filled with wind and rain. And this time, the house doesn't stand, but it actually falls with a great crash. This is what Jesus said. Now, this is an ominous parable. It's not for those of us in the room, because everybody in the room is assuming we're building a house over here on a solid rock. But if anybody in the room were to think I might be building over here on shifting sand, this parable sort of freaks us out a little bit. And there would have been this heavy, contemplative, powerful silence in the crowd. Because nobody hears that and says, I'm going to build my life on shifting sand. Because the idea of a house crashing is tragic at best. And we could all tell stories of a house crashing, broken homes and betrayal and addictions or getting caught or whatever the case might be. It's never a pretty sight when a life crashes. So Jesus is saying, build your life, all of your life, on what is truth. Build your life on the foundation of me. Build on what is truth, and when life hits the fan, you won't hit the ground. So as people come and start visiting our church, they'll come to a guest celebration or they'll come to a Sunday, and they've driven by a whole bunch of churches to get to this one, and they'll inevitably ask me the question, Tom, what's unique about Alive? What makes this church unique? And it all comes down to this. About 11 years ago, this church learned some disturbing statistics. And what we learned was this. In our county, a county we've been a part of for over 100 years, there were about 80% of our county was currently unchurched. That's Pickens County. Now, I know we have multiple counties now represented in our church, but we didn't when we started this. So now when we learn there are 96,000 people in a county that we had been a part of for 100 years that were unchurched, to be quite honest, it wrecked us. And we thought, my goodness, are we just terrible at what we do for a living? I mean, we're nice people, we're doing, what's happening? Why is it like this? And so we got kind of serious about the whole thing, and we changed everything. And believe me, it was a process. We changed absolutely everything in order to reach this number. And the way we all say it now is, when we die and other people fill these seats, this number will be less. And since we began the process, God's given us 1% of that number so far. A little bit more, 1.5, but who's counting? And so when our children are actually in charge and they're running the show, they're going to have a whole different kind of marketing and branding. They're going to have a different number. But for us, this is our number. And when we die, this is less. And so as this was going on and God was wrecking my heart about this, like, man, Lord, we apparently stink at reaching our community. What are we doing wrong? And so I was kind of talking to God about this, and we were talking, praying over the whole thing and drawing it out on a napkin and all this kind of stuff. And I was thinking, man, Lord, what are we supposed to do? And Peter Drucker, great business guru, says this: every organization needs to know what's business and how's business doing. Well, so my business was clear. We want to see these folks spiritually transformed. That was the business that we're in. Lord, I want to see the 96,000 people, whether they're at this church or another church or another church, I don't care. We just want to see 96,000 people changed and spiritually transformed. And the question became, well, how does that happen? And it was very simple. That happens when everybody begins a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. That's what the whole thing's about. There's no way spiritual transformation can take place without people beginning a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. To use our house analogy in the Flip the House series, this is the foundation stuff. It's the personal relationship with Jesus Christ. Each of us has this opportunity to have that relationship. The second thing that I kind of drew on the napkin that day, and you've seen this if you've seen it, it's all over the church, but that I drew on the napkin that day was this, and this was required much more from me because I'm just frankly not that great of a drawer. But it was so much harder, but I'm doing really good on this particular one. Can you all tell what that is? Just okay, so what this is we said, okay, spiritual transformation happens this way. When the 96,000 begin a personal relationship with Jesus and find an active role in Christian community. In other words, it wasn't enough to say, hey, I'm going to become a Christian, personal relationship with Jesus, and I'm going to sit in a mountain cabin and smoke a peace pipe all the time. That's fine. That's not spiritual transformation. The idea is if we will actually begin a personal relationship with Jesus and then start doing life together, find an active role in Christian community, then spiritual transformation begins to take place. And Jesus laid this plan out. And Jesus laid the plan, and it stands out from the world and how we care for each other and how we love one another. That's what Jesus said. Last week we studied this when 1 Peter, he said, above all, love each other deeply. Because love covers over a multitude of sin, which is why these folks are all happy. Putting love above all other agendas. Is everybody with me? In light of our current culture, putting love above all other agendas when it comes to how we relate to each other is a challenging thought. Because, here it comes, Peter isn't speaking about easy, cotton candy, bachelorette kind of love. He's not speaking about a feeling. Peter's actually speaking about the motherlode of love. He's talking about agape love. And that kind of love is actually a love that chooses to be loving. Are you tracking with what I'm saying? That kind of love that Peter is speaking about is a choice that God has given us through his Son. It's this straining, reaching, sacrificing kind of love. And here's my question. Who doesn't want to be part of a community that's loving each other that way? Now, as I've lived with this specific diagram, here's something I know, because you've probably done it in your mind and already, and it's fair. We will tend to prioritize this one. When we think about how we do life, we all want to make sure the salvation thing is cared for. We prioritize that relationship with Jesus, and that's a good thing. We get serious about salvation, but here's my concern. We get sort of lackadaisical about how we're doing Christian community. We accept the fact that we're all saved. We just stink at showing it to each other. We listen to the Bible about how we're to be saved, but we ignore the Bible when it speaks about how we're to relate to each other, forgive one another, love each other above all things. We become a place of nice people, but not different people. This becomes a nice community, but not a holy one. And the church is awesome, though. When we get this right, holy smokes, we are amazing. And we all love the church. And man, it is a sight to behold. When you watch the members of Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church, imagine putting that on a bumper sticker. But when we watch the members of that church respond to the tragedy with such love, I'm screaming at the television, that's us, we're the church. With mercy and forgiveness, you all are setting such an example. God has given you this stage, and man, you are hitting a home run. I so marvel at you. You are being salt and light, and I'm cheering them on, praying for them as they're going forward. We do that, and we think, man, I'm so glad to be part of the bride of Christ. And yet, the reason you're all sitting there grumpy looking right now, with your arms crossed, is because, is it too strong to say we all hate the church when she doesn't do community right? Because if we're honest, we're not known for how well we do relationships or community. We're actually known for how poorly we do community most of the time. And there are times when I shake my head at how church people treat people. Fair? There are times when I shake my head about how this group of people within the walls of the church talks about that group of people within the walls of the church. There are times when I shake my head when this group of people called the church talks about people that aren't even part of the church. Sometimes I'm embarrassed by the way I speak about different groups. Come on, let's just be honest for a moment. It breaks our hearts, right? To hear of hate or gossip or slander taking place within the body. And so the church has this reputation not for Christian community, but for actually being judgmental and self-righteous and hypocritical. And churches are known for talking about loving deeply, but we're not known for loving deeply, especially people that are different than we are. And so we're known for accepting grace for ourselves because, man, Tom was a hellion too. We're just not known for extending grace to people that are different than we are. So we're like, Lord, give me all the grace, give me all the grace, give me all the grace. No, I'm not giving any of it away. And oftentimes our community failures actually become deterrents to the very people we're trying to reach. We want to reach people that don't know you, Jesus, but we're not going to act like we do. Fair? And it's the complete opposite of God's plan. People that are outside of this community think, I don't want anything to do with that body. Jesus said, this is how we're all going to know you're my disciples. He said, just love each other. Love each other, for heaven's sake. In the name of me, love each other. As we reach people in our community, especially on this particular Sunday, we Christians have to get this one right. We hope that people will look at the community of Alive and think, I want to be part of what they do there. Do you know those people don't even agree with me, but their love is wiping me out. And having the kind of community we all desire won't happen because all of y'all are the nicest people in town, because frankly, you're not. You're pretty nice, but we're probably not the nicest people in town. Having this kind of community the church is to be known for won't happen when we all of a sudden agree with each other. Having this kind of community that we're all looking for won't happen when this group votes just like that group votes. Having the kind of community that's attractive will happen as this group who thinks differently from that group is known more for what they love than what they hate. And as this group chooses to love deeply and love in a way that God calls us to. Agape is this. It is love that comes from God, and it's manifested by our choices or in our wills. I love you, not because you're kind to me. I love you because I am choosing. I have agape love for you. I love you not because you think like I do. I love you because I was loved with that kind of love, and I want to pass it on to you. I want to strain deeply to love you in that way. Now, the problem in this room is I've been using words like community and love. And thanks to the age of Instagram and Facebook and likes, I don't even know what those are, I'm just saying that. But when those little check things is, I like that, we all think we're loved a lot by a lot of people. Kids, we evaluate how well we're loved. Oh, we've got 12 likes. I don't know if that's a lot or not, but we have a lot of likes. Obviously, we're loved and valued in community. Look, Dad, I got 2 likes. And the problem is, community becomes something that is sort of throwawayable. That's not a word, but let's pretend it is. And we find ourselves sort of not valuing this thing and not taking this part very seriously. But here's what I want you to see. So we start interacting with each other in a way as if this is a throwawayable thing. But this is the part I want you to see, and this is the passage I want to take, because God takes the way Christians do community far more seriously than we do. See, in Christian community, especially a church of size, if this group doesn't like a certain group, well, you just shun them. You just walk by them and don't say anything. That way y'all can still pretend like we're Christians. And we'll be okay with that. We've got 14 likes. But that's not okay with what God said. It's not okay with what God did. He takes the way Christians do community far more seriously than we do. In the early church, the one described in Acts 2, first 4 chapters, the new church is getting born of Acts 1, 2, 3, 4. And then all of a sudden, something happens in community. Community's marked by generosity, and we're marked by caring for each other, but then something tragic happens, and it changes everything. Acts chapter 5, verse 1. A man named Ananias, together with his wife Sapphira, sold a piece of property. With his wife's full knowledge, he kept back part of the money for himself. Now that's the issue right here. Not that he kept the money back for himself, but he lied about keeping the money back for himself. And he brought the rest and he put it at the apostles' feet. Then Peter said, Ananias, how is it that Satan has so filled your heart that you have lied to the Holy Spirit and have kept for yourself some of the money you received for the land? Didn't it belong to you to begin with? This is what Peter is saying. After it was sold, you could have done whatever you wanted with the money. What made you think of doing such a thing? In other words, lying to the community. You have not lied just to the community, but you've actually lied to God. And when this happened, Ananias falls down and dies. Aren't you glad you're at church today? It's just a feel-good Sunday all around, isn't it? It gets worse. About 3 hours later, his wife comes in not knowing what had happened. And so Peter asks her, tell me, is this the price you and Ananias got for the land? And she, yes, it is. That's the price. Peter said, how could you agree to test the Spirit of the Lord? Look, the feet of the people who buried your husband are at the door, and they're going to carry you out also. And what happened to her husband happened to her. She falls down and dies. So I thought we should take another offering at this point in the service. You never know. The reason I bring all that to your attention is because of this last verse. After all this happened, brand new church, just up and going, baby church. Great fear seized the whole church. Great fear seized the whole church. And all who heard about these events, so in other words, not just church people, people outside the church. Now this is a morbid story. As the church is getting started, God makes something clear, and it's, I think, the message we have to embrace today and be willing to change for. Here's what it is. Ready? God values this community called the church more than you do. God is making a large, powerful statement about this thing called the church. Christian community is not something for us to play some sort of childish game with. It's not something for us to work the politics and the power in. It's not something for us to form attitudes and resentment in. It's not something for us to get bitter about. This is the church, the bride of Christ, and God takes it seriously, even if we don't. Christian community is not something you put on like costume jewelry. God said, not in my bride. And when the opportunity for Ananias and Sapphira come and they start being inauthentic in community, they start saying they're filled with love, but they refuse to be able to love those people. They start saying they're one way, but they're actually something different. When that starts happening, God says, this isn't going to be tolerated. And I must confess, and I'm kind of amped up about all this, but I often wonder what the reaction would be if the way that we loved each other and the way that we loved our communities, even people that believe differently than we do, the way we cared for each other in public and in private came under the same scrutiny of Ananias and Sapphira. I wonder if we would be so flippant with our comments and so accepting of our poor attitudes. I wonder if we would settle for being nice as opposed to being holy. I wonder if we would settle for the gossip and slander and tearing down under the sanctity of our marriage and our home that we wouldn't say outside of our home. I wonder if we would allow division in our small group and Bible studies and gossip and slander in Bible studies and wonder why God's not blessing us. I wonder if we would choose what is right over what is easy. Because Jesus comes to the human race and he says, life doesn't have to be this way. Life doesn't have to be filled with betrayal and dishonesty and hatred and self-righteousness and judgment. There's a better way. And right before Jesus ends the greatest message ever delivered, he said, there's a place where the first can be last and the last first. There's a place where the meek are blessed. There's a place where when you are persecuted because of me, you are blessed. There's a place where those who show mercy are blessed. There's a place when those who work to make peace are blessed. Where this group understands and values that group that believes so differently than we do, enough to make sure we can live at peace with you. Enough to make sure that I can extend mercy to you. And whatever I do in my behavior doesn't say I won't extend mercy to you. So Christians hear Jesus and they begin to change and build a life on something deeper. But do you know what the most disturbing part of Ananias and Sapphira for me is? I mean, yeah, they died. That was a bummer and that was bad and all that kind of stuff. But the most disturbing part of Ananias and Sapphira, and the reason it's so disturbing is I see it here. I see it here. And if I'm not careful, I see it here. Ananias and Sapphira didn't long to become righteous or holy. They just wanted to be known as being righteous and holy. Ananias and Sapphira didn't long to be generous people. They just wanted to be known as being generous people. And that can work into our community as well. We want to be known as loving, but we don't want to be loving other than to ourselves. We want to be known as graceful, but we don't want to be graceful to people who live and act and believe differently than we do. We don't want to strain in our love for each other. We'd rather just hold a grudge and pretend like we love each other. And this kind of community, friends, kills the church and takes away the power of the mission of the church. There's even yet one deeper sadness to this story for me. There was a moment of truth in this story for Sapphira. It's in verse 8. There were really two options on the table. I think this describes the church today. We have these two options on the table, and she had to choose. And so Sapphira enters the room, and she's probably expecting there's going to be like a party for her because she doesn't know what's happened, and everyone's going to think, oh, look how beautiful Christian she is. But she's been inauthentic. And she walks into a room much like this room. There's this silence. And she's kind of looking around, wondering what's happened. There are two options on the table. And Peter says to her, tell me, Sapphira, is this the price you got? Are you telling the truth? Tell me, are you really loving toward people, or do you want to be seen as loving? Tell me, are you really broken for lost people? Or do you just hate them? And everybody in the room waits with bated breath for what Sapphira is going to choose. If she would just be truthful with herself in the moment. You know what? I haven't been loving him. You know what? I haven't been walking like I'm talking. You know what? I find myself loving people like me and hating people a lot like me. If she just would have been honest, the story would have a different ending. It would be life instead of death, grace instead of fear. But like you and me, this is a stubborn person, and she refuses to own the truth about who she is and what she's done. And another house built on shifting sand falls flat. Dostoevsky wrote this. By the way, that's the third time I've said that word today without stumbling. You know who said this? To love someone is to see him as God intended him. Doesn't that help? So maybe a great fear within the walls of this community is a good thing. Maybe going home with a great fear about how we're going to relate and interact with each other is a good thing. Maybe a great fear before we fire up our Facebook post is a good thing. Not a fear that's making us insecure. No. But one that makes us loving toward each other. One that makes us lift up agape love over being nice. Lift up agape love over my opinion. Because that choice is before each and every one of us, even in the moment. Great fear sees the whole church, Acts says. That's the first time the word church was used in the book of Acts. Right there. Right after Ananias and Sapphira. Right after the two people dropped dead at the Bible study. Right after two people tried to live inauthentically in community. The church means the called out ones. Called out to love deeply in a way the world has never seen. And we can do this. It's going to be painful. It's going to hurt. But I'll help you if you help me. And let's love deeply and recklessly, not compromising, not taking away what we believe is truth, not taking away what the Bible says, but living as called out ones. This is the community we are called out to love. Different from the world, higher than the world. And just maybe, if you'll sign on and you'll sign on and you, if we'll just sign on, just half of us, maybe God's kingdom will come. Maybe we'll not be known for what we're picketing or against, but maybe we'll say, those people don't even agree with my lifestyle, but man, they love me. And maybe they'll come and they'll be part of this fellowship. And we will love them crazy. And who knows? Maybe their heart will change too. Just like mine did. If God's kingdom will come.